You are looking live at the White House, where President Trump is expected to make a big announcement within the next 30 minutes. Not on Iran, not on impeachment, but on something that's probably flying under your radar. The Washington Post reports the president plans to scale back an environmental policy that's been in place for 50 years. The law, known as the National Environmental Policy Act, requires federal agencies to look at the climate impacts of big infrastructure projects like building mines, like laying pipelines, drilling, et cetera, before giving the green light. Well, the White House is now trying to move to exempt some projects from that kind of review, a big shift that would make it a lot easier to build things like oil and gas pipelines. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the oil industry is already into this, telling the Post it would remove barriers that are, quote, stifling construction of key infrastructure projects. But one environmental activist group says the Trump administration is doing a serious injustice to people living in industrial communities, adding it's a matter of life and death. Republican Senator Mike Braun of Indiana sits on the Environment and Public Works Committee and is here to talk about that and much more, Senator, including impeachment and Iran, which we'll get to in a second. But let me start on that topic. You, in October, I know, reached across the aisle to work with Senate Democrats on some of these climate issues. You told your hometown paper, the Indy Star, that somebody has to start on our side of the aisle, right? You point to the basic chemistry and physics that putting carbon on the air makes greenhouse gas effects problematic. That's not the right place to be. Given this news today, is President Trump on the wrong side of history here?
Well, when you use words like life and death, that's probably taking it to the extreme to make your point that if you relax some of this stuff, it'll have that kind of impact. I can tell you, I look at it from both angles. I have been a conservationist my whole life, was the first Republican to join the Climate Caucus. We need to be in on the conversation. I also know, as a state legislator back in Indiana, when we're the crossroads of America, had to do infrastructure projects, we do all the work. 80% of the bill is paid for generally by the feds, and you have a lot of cumbersome rules and regulations that sometimes make the projects 15 to 20% more expensive. So I will, like I do on most things, find that equilibrium to where we do not trash the environment, and we cut and streamline a lot of these projects so it doesn't cost an undue amount. So it's like everything since I've been here. There's a balance, and I intend to speak out to where I think that good balance would be.
Do you think this tips the scales on the wrong side of it, though, what the president's doing today? Quickly, Senator?
Not really, because it's too soon to tell. We need to be watchful, keep the best of what EPA has done, get rid of the stuff that hamstrings and makes it very expensive for no good reason.
Let me ask you about something else that I know is on your mind, and that is the possibility looming now of the Senate impeachment trial. NBC News exclusively has now gotten our hands on a draft of Senator Lindsey Graham's resolution, which would call on Speaker Pelosi to immediately transmit the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. Is that a resolution that you plan to support?
I think there's a point in time where you do need to either send it or end it. Steve Daines and I did a op-ed on it. I am still hoping that it gets here without that kind of measure, that we get into phase one, just like we did in the Clinton proceeding, and then we'll see if we need witnesses, which is the whole issue I know they're worried about. And all I can tell you is when we get to that point, I'm hoping they're considering that that's going to be reciprocal. And if it's not reciprocal, I think it's a faux issue to put out there, because if they think that's what's driving the process, I know folks on our side, and I'm sure the president as well, would want his slate of witnesses. So I don't know where that goes. 5 Democrats in the Senate, if not more, have come out and said, bring it over. So I think time is working against Pelosi on that issue.
Although it sounds like you are willing to give her a little bit of extra time, Senator.
I would rather see it come over in a way where we didn't force it, although I think at a point in time we need to look at it.
Before I get to Iran, I want to ask you, we have been reporting here at NBC News about the president's legal defense team. I've spoken with my sources over at the White House and in and around the administration as well, who say no final decisions have been made, but there are discussions about bringing Republican members of Congress over to present the case. Some of the names that have come up, Mike Johnson, for example, Jim Jordan, others. Would that be a good idea in your view? Do you want to see your House colleagues come and defend the president, or do you worry that that muddies the water?
I think that would totally be up to the president's defense team. And if they think that Jim Jordan and others would help make their case, I think that's fine. I think their day in court is needed to give his point of view.
On Iran, Senator Mike Lee, your colleague, your Republican colleague in the Senate, called the briefing, as we talked about at the top of the show, the worst he has ever seen on a military issue, the intelligence briefing yesterday. You, however, said that President Trump's stock value after attending is at an all-time high. So I ask this with a smile and with respect, Senator, but were you in the same briefing?
So it's amazing how, yes, we were all in the same briefing, and I even noticed Bernie Sanders came into it. So I think it was important for all of us to hear. All I can tell you is I'm with Mike Lee and Rand Paul on a lot of issues, especially when it would talk about budget. In this case, I think that what I heard from the folks there telling us what led up to it, that it made sense to do it. The issue of what was the imminent thing that might occur, especially when it came from the military point of view that was there in the briefing. It, to me, was clear. Now, if you look at the procedural part of it, of what happens next, and Mike Lee was mostly interested in, what do we do if something more significant occurs with Iran? I'm probably with him on that kind of idea. I just didn't think
Would you support the War Powers Resolution then, Senator, before I let you go? Then is that something you'd vote for?
In general, I think Congress needs to be more involved. We've been derelict over decades. I just don't know if the timing should be next week, because then it's associated with this situation. And I think what happened in taking out Soleimani made sense with what led up to it. And it begs the question, what would the opposition have said had something occurred and we didn't do anything? So I'm open to discussing where Congress should be more involved.
Senator Mike Braun, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you joining us live on the show here again. Thank you for your time.